By the time Wednesday evening rolled around, the Bengals only made minor moves in free agency, but more will come. We'll talk about why we know that and take a look around the NFL in today's show.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien. Together, we're your hosts of the Locked On Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button on audio platforms and subscribe on YouTube. The thumbs up if you like what we're doing to make sure we're delivered to your eyes and ears first thing every day with all the latest on your Cincinnati Bengals. And James, only a couple of minor moves to report today for the Cincinnati Bengals on Wednesday at 3:19 Pacific time, 6:19 Eastern time. As we're recording this episode, two moves have been announced for the Cincinnati Bengals. One of those being the return of Clark Harris, which the man himself broke on Twitter, long snap God back for the Bengals for 2022, and Michael Thomas, the safety, not the wide receiver, but Michael Thomas, the safety, who found some playing time even in the playoffs as the third safety for the Cincinnati Bengals. Also a special teamer, will be back. I'm assuming both of these guys, James, are on something close to minimum deals, which is what they've been playing on for the last few years, or in the last year in Michael Thomas's case. And if that is the case, then they together combine for a total cap hit of $700,000, which leaves the Bengals still, after the cuts we're assuming they'll make for Trey Waynes and Trey Hopkins, both of which still aren't official, leaves the Bengals with $21 million in cap space, plus rollover money, including rollover money, or however you want to say it. I'm still looking, James, though, at $50 million in cash that we would expect the Bengals to be paying out. And that, to me, means more is coming. But for today, Clark Harris and Michael Thomas are the two moves so far.
Yep. And it's not, here's the thing, is last year at this time, it was probably around the same. I'm trying to think of exactly. Obviously, there was the Trey Hendrickson blow up, but it took them a couple of days. And, the Riley Reef meeting and everything was the next week. And then they were able to get him done. And then all of the guys got introduced that Friday. And so it takes some time. And, I'm looking at our tracker and I'm paying attention, and we'll get into some new guys that are out there on the free agent market that have gotten cut in a few minutes here. But there's a ton of talent out there. There's a ton of guys that fit what the Bengals are looking for, fit the needs that we've discussed here. And so I think they're working. I also think it's tough to take less than you're anticipating. And I think some of these guys, that's the reality that they're facing. And I'm not saying the Bengals are about to get a bunch of steals, but if you're still around now, outside of, Teron Armstead, who's waiting on Deshaun Watson reportedly, a lot of these guys, they were probably hoping to get scooped up. Tyrann Mathieu, his market might not be what he was hoping for. And I'm not saying the Bengals are in on him. It's just a top free agent that I'm pointing out that is still out there. So there are a lot of guys that could fill what the Bengals are looking for. And so I think that they're going to put that cash to good use. I think they're going to add players at the same time. Waiting is tough, right? It's tough for you. It's tough for me. It's tough for fans. It's tough for everybody. But we certainly know that behind closed doors, they are working. And it is going to be interesting to see which route they go. One guy that I had mentioned during our free agency mock was Trent Brown. He's visiting the Seahawks. Doesn't sound like the Bengals are really into him at right tackle. So where do they go right tackle wise? Because I think they're going to sign one. They would be naive. And honestly, what's the word? I don't want to be too critical, but naive to just assume that one of these guys is going to blossom, that Isaiah Prince is suddenly going to figure it out, or, whoever they think, Deontay Smith. So I think they're going to sign someone in a proven right tackle, and we'll see who that is, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be Trent Brown.
Yeah, I would say the word would probably be misguided, or perhaps overconfident one of those two
Stupid
ideas.
was the word I was thinking, but it might be too critical, so I
You
don't want
said you weren't
to.
going to be too critical. I was coming up with some more politically friendly words. You talked about the timeline, James, and luckily our friend Joe Goodberry, who was on the show with us just a couple days ago, it's been a really long week, has the timeline for last free agency when the tampering period was on March 15th and free agency officially opened on March 17th. Last year, on day one, the Bengals came to terms with Trey Hendrickson. On day
Late.
two, Chidobe Awuzie and Mike Hilton. So 3 players through tampering. On day three was Larry Ogunjobi. So if we want the
Wow.
Bengals to maintain pace, it would be get another guy announced today. Day 5 last year was Riley Reef on the 19th, 2 days after free agency opened. Eli Apple the 23rd, and Quentin Spain the 30th. So 2 weeks later.
What they would say too is they got BJ Hill done. That's what they would say. So it would be
Sure.
3 in their eyes, because they have players that are actually worth keeping versus the past couple of years where that wasn't necessarily the case. So, yeah, and that's part of it is the Hill deal gets overlooked a little bit, but uh, I think that part of it too is that the offensive line market, specifically the tackle market, is very slow moving, like molasses in my backyard in the middle of December. All right. That thing is moving really slow. And at some point it'll get going. And I expect the Bengals to be in on it.
I think they're waiting for something, whether it's Lyle Collins, whether it's Teron Armstead, or other players waiting for some Deshaun Watson dust to settle as he's in play for 4 teams. But it still sounds like the Saints are his preference if they can figure out how to make that work.
You
So
think that? I don't. I think it's the Falcons. I think the Falcons are. I think he's going to Atlanta.
reports up until today were that from Ian Rappaport, the Saints were in an advantageous position. From other national level reporters, that his preference was the Saints, but I could see Atlanta coming out of nowhere, and there's going to be a bit of a QB shuffle either way. Matt Ryan, Baker Mayfield, and Deshaun Watson all looking like they're going to be elsewhere potentially, especially if Watson ends up in Atlanta. So I do think that there's a little bit of the market that could be waiting for those things to play out. But the reality is, at this point, a lot of what we're going to hear is scheduled visits. You remember scheduled visits, those are back. You mentioned Trent Brown taking a scheduled visit with Seattle. That's how free agency used to be, is we would know what guys were potentially signing with teams because they would go visit them in their
Mhm.
cities. And then we would hear when the visit completed, and then we'd know that a deal wasn't reached, or we would hear about a deal if a deal was reached. A little bit different now with everything that's virtual, all the stuff that happens in the tampering period. And James, like you said, a lot of players are still getting introduced to the market. Matt Ioannidis, whose name I may have somehow
Ioannidis.
gotten
Ioannidis.
right. Close enough, man.
Ioannidis.
I'll take that. JC Treader recently cut, Daryl Williams, some other guys. There's some new guys getting introduced to the market as well that we should talk about that could be fits for the Bengals, and we'll do that coming up next.
Maybe you want to wager on where Deshaun Watson lands. Like I said, I think it's Atlanta. Grew up 50 miles from there. Certainly went out of his way to put his arms around the Falcons and find a way to potentially get there. We'll see. Maybe it's Cleveland. Maybe it's Carolina. Maybe it is New Orleans, like Jake in all those reports we're talking about. Regardless, you can wager on that and so much more at BetOnline right now. So maybe you want to talk about Super Bowl odds and you want to get in on the Falcons odds or some of these other odds. You could do that. Deshaun Watson's landing spot, or it's March. It's madness. College hoops. The tournament is here Thursday. It's all day long. Friday, all day long. One of my favorite days in sports. And of course, I think the Bengals are going to be really busy on Thursday and Friday, which means I might not be able to wager. I might not be able to watch all the games, but you can, and you can wager on them at BetOnline right now. It's a one-stop shop for all of your betting needs. So sign up today on your laptop, PC, or mobile device and get in on the fun. BetOnline, where the game starts.
James, cuts, cut downs, casualties, whatever you want to call them, are
Mm-hmm.
happening around the NFL. Washington, the Commanders had a wave of cuts. Matt, you say the name, Matt
Ioannidis. Ioannidis.
Ioannidis. Matt Ioannidis was released by the Commanders along with a few other players from Cleveland. J.C. Treader, Austin Hooper were released on Wednesday. Darrell Williams, we've been talking about for a few days now. Brian Bulaga from the Chargers, a right tackle, was cut. He can't seem to stay on the field, but the list is growing. Eric Flowers, one of those Washington Commanders, has played a lot of left guard recently and has been, in my opinion, pretty okay there. I was the highest on him in our free agency sheet. Billy Turner from the Packers cut. When you look at some of these names that have become available, we've obviously talked about some of them. We've talked
Mhm.
about some of the unrestricted free agents and Lyle Collins as a trade target or another cut target. Who stands out to you, James, as guys that could be potential fits for the Bengals?
Well, naturally, you look at the talent level, and we talked about him a lot, so I'm just going to mention him and keep moving. And you can listen to Wednesday's show if you want to hear my magical plan to get J.C. Treader to Cincinnati. But I love the idea of J.C. Treader. That being said, other guys, Darrell Williams, I'd mention him. He was released on Monday. If you could get him, that'd be great. But of the ones that were released Wednesday, and there's a lot of new guys, Matt Ioannidis, like you mentioned, Eric Flowers, Austin Hooper, excuse me, are the ones that stand out the most to me. I think all three could be fits. Now, with Flowers, the question is, are they going to pay what he's asking potentially for another guard, another interior lineman? Because if you're doing that, then I go the Treader route. I go a little higher and I get the better player, and I think I fortify the line more. But Flowers, 28 years old, Treader, 31. Maybe they view it differently from that perspective. He is a former first round pick. Wouldn't be shocked at all if they wanted to go that route at guard. But Hooper this is and could be a blessing in disguise if you get a guy like Austin Hooper, who's a two-time Pro Bowler, who underwhelmed in Cleveland after signing a big contract there. But look at what's going on in Cleveland right now. And the situation he was in with Atlanta, a dome team helps, pass happy team with Matt Ryan, and you got Julio Jones and all of these pieces. It was Calvin Ridley for a bit, and all of these pieces around him. Well, look at Cincinnati. What do they ask out of their tight end? I think Hooper could be that. I think he could certainly be a really good option. He struggled with drops last year, but his first 5 years he didn't struggle with drops, and so I think that was a situational thing as much as anything. And he's 27 years old. It feels like he's older. He's only 27. So to me, if I'm Austin Hooper, I want to sign with a team where I can play a ton, where I don't have to worry about David Njoku over my shoulder, a former first-round pick who's freakishly talented and obviously played his way into the franchise tag in Cleveland. And I want to catch passes from a really good quarterback. I think it would make a lot of sense for Austin Hooper and the Bengals to get together and see if they could reach terms on a short-term deal. Maybe it's a 2-year contract where he can test the market again and kind of reestablish his value, because it's certainly tanked in his 2 seasons in Cleveland.
Yeah, that's what'll be interesting to me about Austin Hooper is what price tag ends up on him. He comes in at the same exact composite tier score in our spreadsheet as OJ Howard at a 3.3. I had him at a 3. You and Joe have him as a 3.5.
Mhm.
And similar grading for Austin Howard, 3s and 3.5s. Sorry,
OJ
for
Howard.
OJ Howard.
Yep.
So, similar marks there. Behind Gerald Everett, who we seem to think was unanimously a third tier guy, and behind Rob Gronkowski, of course, who most of us gave a 2.5, but Joe gave a 3. So those are the top end tight
Mhm.
ends that are still out there. But what's curious to me about it is what's the market for Austin Hooper? Because
Mhm.
maybe he's not the most athletic guy. Maybe he doesn't have the speed that you're looking for. Although he is a good athlete, he doesn't have top end tight end speed. Ran a 4.7 back at his 40 or at the combine and his pro day. Had decent, not amazing jumps. Had decent, not amazing agility. Is a little bit of a better athlete than Drew Sample, but certainly has been more productive in the NFL and has been a solid blocker as well.
Mhm.
So what's his market after 2 down years in Cleveland? Is it $4 million a year? Or is it something like we've seen with other tight ends around the league that's $6-7 million a year?
Oh, I don't think so. But you're right. It
Who
could be.
knows? Because
And
these tight end Will Disley, $8 million to go back to Seattle. Like
mhm.
the tight end deals have been really weird, but how far down do you want to go? Do you want to wait for a guy like Jared Cook? If projected $4 million, a guy that is certainly in the twilight of his career. Anthony Fursker, 2.5 million. Jordan Akins, I feel like he might have actually gone back to Houston, but if he didn't, 3.75 million. These names don't inspire a ton of enthusiasm for me. So
Mhm.
Hooper, at least with a bit of a track record, if the market is contained, is an interesting player who's been very productive and at the very least would be better than a rookie. And in my opinion, would be a better receiving threat than would be Drew Sample. But I would still probably be looking for a little bit more athleticism at the position for my first choice.
Sure. OJ Howard, I would have ahead of Hooper, and I think I have that rated properly. The same age, feels like Howard hasn't really had the opportunities, right? Gronk gets there when Brady gets there, and then he gets injured, and it's just been tough. And the Buccaneers, they did resign, they restructured and kept Cameron Brate 2 years, $8 million. Gronk probably going back there, so maybe OJ Howard's a guy you can snipe. And so, to me, what I think the Bengals are going to do at tight end, and watch them go sign a tight end today, or tonight, or tomorrow, whatever. I think they're going to wait enough, like for another wave, and have a couple more of these guys go off, assuming the market hasn't come back down to reality. And they're going to get one of these guys and like the value because do you really is it if you're the Bengals knowing what you're asking your tight end to do, if you could get OJ Howard a week from now for 4 million, and I'm not saying him, or Austin Hooper for 4 million, or Hayden Hurst for 4 million, like, is there a huge difference from those three? There is with Cook because you're talking age and everything like that. But there's a couple guys that are still there, 3 to 4, I would say, in that range. Gerald Everett's another one. I can't believe I missed him. That if they're still on the board, at some point you might be able to snipe one of them. And suddenly, after everybody spent all this money on tight end, you look up and you have the good value. And I think if I had to guess, I think that's what they're going to try to do. Again, watch me jinx it, and they're going to go sign one of these guys for $8 million. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case.
I think 8 million is probably too high because if it's 8 million for one of these kinds of guys, why wouldn't they just spend the eight to match the Jets offer, assuming that was on the table for them with CJ Uzama? So
Number of
so that
years potentially, or
could be.
it depends.
It could be that they don't want to spend that much a tight end. It could be that they want to cap out at 6 million, perhaps.
Which is
And
probably the most realistic. I agree.
if that's the case, then maybe one of these other guys does make sense. Looking at some of these other names that got cut, I wouldn't rule out Eric Flowers, although I do think they're going to prioritize tackle ahead of
Agreed.
another interior lineman. We've talked about that for a couple days, and Matt Ioannidis, I think, will have a lot of attention around the league. There was a
Yeah.
lot of hype from like a lot of the different writers and podcasters I follow for other teams were like, "Yep, go get him. He makes sense." And for the Bengals, this would make sense as another
It would.
rotational three piece, and so that's why the interest is there. There weren't very many interior defensive linemen available in free agency in the first place. A lot of the ones that were outside of Larry Ogunjobi and BJ Hill were more suited to three or to be a nose tackle or were less productive than you would like a three tech to be. There's still some guys out there,
Mhm.
but Matt Ioannidis is certainly one of the more intriguing names from Wednesday's, official league year open. You have to be cap compliant, cut down wave from the Washington Commanders. And so no movement yet for Lyle Collins. He's still a Dallas Cowboy at the time of recording, and the Bengals still employ Trey Hopkins and Trey Waynes as at the time of recording. We'll see if those moves happen anytime soon. But around the NFL, while free agency has moved a little bit slowly, there's been a lot of activity in the AFC. And I think that in addition to the money points to more activity for the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think we need to take a look around the AFC North and some of the other pass rushers going from the NFC to the AFC in this free agent period coming up next.
But first, I got to talk to you about rockauto.com because the Bengals, well, they need reliability in the trenches, which is why they should go after JC Treader, which is why they should go after Darrell Williams. Well, if you need reliability on the road, and you do, I do, everybody does, you need to get to rockauto.com. They're a family owned business that have been in business for more than 2 decades. And well, they're going to save you money every time you go there on your auto parts. It's the same quality parts, the same manufacturers, all of those things, but you can shop from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to go to the big box store. You don't have to go to the dealership. Why spend 30, 50, even 100% more when you can go to rockauto.com from the comfort of your own home and save money on car parts right now? So check them out, rockauto.com. I've used them. You should too, regardless of what you drive, whether it's a Honda, a Daewoo, an Audi, a Mercedes Benz like Jake Liscow, it doesn't matter. They got you covered at rockauto.com. Go there now, see all the parts available for your car or truck, and be sure to write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
James, looking around the AFC, the influx of pass rushers in the last week really stands out to me. Today, Zadarius Smith goes from Green Bay to Baltimore back to the Baltimore Ravens. The Bengals will face him twice a year when they face Baltimore. Obviously, TJ Watt's already there. The Steelers also probably get Stephon Tuitt back this year to go with Cam Hayward. We know that the Steelers present a challenge. We know Miles Jack is in Cleveland, and we'll see if the Browns add another pass rusher to go with him. I would expect that to happen. But in the AFC West, in this escalating arms race that is just going to produce a bloodbath of a division, they keep adding more. Chandler Jones goes and signs with the Las Vegas Raiders today. Obviously, Khalil Mack already traded to the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Denver Broncos add Randy Gregory on Tuesday. So when you look around the AFC and the opponents that the Bengals will be facing, the pass rush that the Bengals faced last year was pretty tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not getting easier this year. Yes, they've improved their right guard position, no doubt about that. Ted Karras should be, I would say, at least a little bit better, if not similar to Trey Hopkins, at least late season pass protection form. Left guard remains an empty spot, and right tackle remains an empty spot. So when you look around the AFC, Miles Jack going to Pittsburgh, the good moves, I would say good moves that Pittsburgh and Baltimore have made in this free agency period. This is a time, this is an opportunity for the Bengals to see what the rest of the league is doing and find their counterpunch. And that's what I'm looking for in the rest of free agency.
For sure. I mean, that's why they can't invest enough in the line. And I get it. They're going to want a corner. They're going to want an edge rusher. But let's be honest here. Look at the Bengals for the next couple of years. If they're going to win championships, which is what they want, if they're going to win the AFC North, the key to that is making sure they have the best quarterback that's playing the best ball in the division, in the conference. And so that's why all these teams are going after rushers, because they want to disrupt Patrick Mahomes, because they want to make sure Burrow feels them, because they want to make sure all of these quarterbacks, whoever it is that they're going up against, that they can get after the passer. And so if you're the Bengals, to me, the counterpunch, continue to fortify the offensive line, continue to invest in it and get proven bodies, right? The idea of Deontay Smith, who might end up being great. And who knows, maybe he comes to camp and kicks Darrell Williams' ass. All right. I'm not saying that won't happen. Or the idea of Jackson Carman. And I think this is the more realistic possibility. That is semi-concerning, right? It's concerning with Jonah Williams. Will he take another step? And so, that's part of the counterpunch, right? Because I think if this team is as good as and reaches its full potential, it's going to be because the offense takes another step, not necessarily the defense, because the offense becomes, the talk of the town, the talk of the league. And it's not just Joe Burrow. It's MVP-like numbers for him. And they become really, really tough to guard and defend because they're not getting pressured. And he can take 5-step drops without flinching and wincing and everything that happens where they couldn't even do that. They couldn't even run 3-step drops in the Super Bowl. So that would be my counterpunch. Maybe they're going to say, oh, well, we're going to go get edge rushers too. But I don't think they're in the reports where it's not like they were in the Chandler Jones market. It's not like they were going to trade for Yannick Ngakoue. Like I find that, extremely unlikely. So that's the other part of it. So if you're not in on those big time edge rushers, the Von Miller sweepstakes, well, then that's fine. But find a way to protect the guy that's going to get you where you want to go.
And there might be some down market edge guys they bring in. That is something that I think makes sense. But the other thing about the tackle market is every team in the AFC is now looking at its tackles like, can we block these guys? Can we block these guys well enough to win this game? The AFC West is looking at what they have to block, and they're thinking, man, do we have a right tackle to go with our left tackle? The answer for I think all 4 of those AFC West teams is no.
Hey, and we have another AFC team getting a deal done. You won't believe this one. Wow, I just mentioned Von Miller. Von Miller to the Buffalo Bills.
I was worried about
6
that one.
years, $120 million, according to Ian Rappaport. Now, who knows what the contract is? There's no way he's going to see the end of that deal. But holy money,
6
Batman.
years?
Yeah. It's half of that has to be BS, right? Half of it. He's like 33, isn't he?
Yeah. That wow. But look, Von Miller's still a good player. We've just
Well,
seen it
yeah, he is.
and
I hate it.
very recently, but I was gonna say the Bills, they didn't really have a guy, but Von Miller to go with what they
God.
do have, and it's just a really solid defense and a solid 3 tech.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, there's somebody else for you to block. But where I was going was the every AFC team now is looking at their tackles and they're like, "Are we good enough here?" There's only
Mm.
so many tackles to go around. Maybe Darrell Williams doesn't go back to Buffalo now. Maybe Buffalo's just tapped themselves out on this Von Miller deal that I'm sure has as well. It's a 6-year deal. I'm actually assuming that at least one of those years is a void year or something. But the, you can only prorate signing bonuses over 5 years anyway. So I'm not really sure what that deal is all about. That's insane. But good for Von Miller there. The AFC is going to be after these right tackles. Darrell Williams,
Mhm.
Lyle Collins, you name one of these guys at the top end, and it's going to be competitive. And so this is where the whole patience, which I want to preach patience, the Bengals will bring more guys in. We talked about how much money they have left to spend versus urgency kind of have to you got to balance that out. You got to make sure you get the guys you want because there aren't infinite options out there, and they
Mhm.
do need to improve at right tackle.
Yep. And so through the first 4 years, just for the Von Miller deal to end this, 17.5 million per year over the first four, according to Rappaport. So huge money. Um, but yeah, that's right. So spend huge money on tackle and don't try to, and I don't think they're going to sell us on Deontay Smith being the starter at tackle. But again, that's why, because if you're going up against Von Miller and you got to go up to Buffalo in the AFC title game or in the divisional round, it's going to be tough. But if you fortify it with a left guard and a right tackle, there's going to be an injury. There's going to be something that happens. You're asking one guy to step up, not two or three, like the Bengals essentially were, where it was Hopkins all season long playing on a knee that clearly wasn't 100% for the first half of the year, and then two guys um, once Riley Reef went down. That just, let's be honest, they weren't ready. And they clearly didn't feel like Jackson Carman was ready either. I know there's a Carman hive out there. So that's the part. So it's one main objective this offseason to me versus all these others. And I'm fine if you don't land the Von Miller on defense or the JC Jackson on defense. But damn it, make sure that number 9's upright because that's the cheat code. Because he's going to find number 1 and number 5. Yes, T. Higgins is changing his number, Tyler Boyd, etc.
The pass rushes in the AFC are just such a gauntlet. Like,
Yes.
even if they dodge some of the we talked about it last year, like, well, this week it's, TJ Watt. This week it's Chris Jones. This week it's Jeffrey Simmons. You name a guy, it's gonna be the same this year. And even if it's not some of these guys in the regular season, because the Bengals obviously don't play all these teams in the regular season, if they want to get to the Super Bowl again, they're going to face at least one of these AFC West teams in almost any scenario. In most scenarios, they're going to face one of these AFC West teams. They might have to go face Buffalo, or Buffalo might have to come to Cincinnati to see them.
Mhm.
Man, the AFC absolute arms race. It is
Yep.
going to be wild. I can't believe that Russell Wilson chose. You know what? I'm gonna go to the AFC West. That looks like a fun opportunity, and you can see why Tom Brady would come back with the way. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a talent exodus from the NFC to the AFC, and it has been
Mhm.
for it feels like a month. It's crazy.
It's like 3 teams in the NFC right now that stand out, right? Or 4, I guess. It'd be the Rams, 49ers, Bucks in no order, Bucks and Packers.
Yeah, and like the 49ers are kind of iffy, like because Jimmy G, what's
Yep.
happening with their quarterback situation.
Yeah,
And
they're
I guess
fourth.
if
Yep.
Deshaun Watson goes to the Saints, from a football perspective, that would be another one. And we're going to have
Yep.
to talk about Deshaun Watson from a football perspective at some point. Really liked what Mina Kimes had to say on her podcast about it and how she's approaching it. That's a delicate subject that we don't need to get into today, though. So we'll be back when the Bengals make a move. And it might be tonight. If you're listening to this as soon as we've uploaded it on Wednesday night, it might be on Thursday. But as soon as the news breaks, we'll be back with analysis, reactions, and more here on the Locked On Bengals podcast. So until next time, Bengals fans, hoo day, and have a good one.